Cancel your ticket, Harper. You are not coming to New Haven this weekend. Those were the first words out of my mother's mouth. I was standing in my tiny kitchen holding a velvet box with a silver pen inside. I had just finished a brutal 12-hour night shift as an emergency room scribe to pay for a $150 train ticket. I asked her why she was canceling on me 2 days before the ceremony. Her response felt like a physical slap across the face. Chloe is graduating from Yale, Harper. She has important friends coming, families with legacy names and summer homes in the Hamptons. We have spent 4 years and our entire life savings crafting her image. I am not going to let you show up in some discount rack dress talking about your little state school program and your late-night hospital shifts. You do not fit in with these people. You will look like the help, and you will embarrass us. So stay home. The line went dead. My name is Harper, and I am 28 years old. 5 years ago, my own parents decided my existence was a liability to my sister's Ivy League aesthetic. They erased me to protect a hollow facade. But life has a strange way of balancing the scales. Because 5 years after that phone call, I did not just step foot on the Yale campus. I stood on the main stage wearing the heavy velvet doctoral robes of the Yale School of Medicine. I was the keynote speaker for my graduating class of neurosurgeons. And my sister Chloe? She was not sitting in the VIP section with legacy families. She was wearing a cheap staff lanyard scanning tickets in the third row, working as a low-level event assistant, because she had gone entirely broke. When I leaned into the microphone to dedicate my speech to those who told me I was not good enough, I looked directly into her pale, terrified eyes. Before I tell you what happened when my parents realized the guest of honor was the daughter they threw away, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Olivia Tells Stories. But only do it if this story truly resonates with you. I would love to know where you are watching from, what time it is there, and how old you are. Drop a comment below. Now let me take you back to that kitchen in the spring of 2019 and the exact moment my family severed our ties. The silence in my apartment after she hung up was deafening. I looked down at the train ticket printed on cheap paper resting on my peeling laminate countertop. $150 meant nothing to the people Chloe was trying to impress, but to me, it was 2 weeks of groceries. I had skipped meals to afford that trip. I had studied anatomy flashcards on the subway to carve out the time. I thought showing up to celebrate her art history degree would finally prove I was worthy of a seat at their table. Instead, my mother used my financial struggle as a weapon to lock the door. I did not scream or throw my phone against the wall. The rejection was too precise for a tantrum. It was a surgical strike, designed to keep me in my place as the inferior backup child. They wanted me hidden so their golden daughter could shine without the shadow of a struggling sister. I carefully took my new clearance rack dress out of my overnight bag and hung it back in the closet. Then I placed the silver pen inside a padded envelope. I walked to the post office the next morning and mailed it to Chloe anyway. I sent it because I refused to let their elitism turn me into a bitter person. I had no idea that same silver pen would end up in a hospital lost and found bin 5 years later and become the ultimate piece of evidence on my graduation day. To understand why my mother felt so comfortable discarding me over a phone call, you have to understand the toxic hierarchy that governed our household from the moment we were born. To understand why my mother felt so comfortable erasing me over a single phone call, you have to understand the invisible hierarchy that governed our house. We lived in a pristine upper-middle-class suburb where appearances dictated your social survival. In that environment, my sister Chloe was the undisputed golden child. She possessed my mother's bright features and effortless charm and a remarkable ability to tell people exactly what they wanted to hear. My parents treated her future like a high-stakes investment portfolio. They drained their savings accounts to ensure she had every conceivable advantage. I learned my place in the family hierarchy during my junior year of high school. Chloe was a senior preparing for her Ivy League applications. My parents hired a private admissions consultant and a specialized tutor. 2 evenings a week, I would walk through the front door smelling like industrial sanitizer from my after-school job, cleaning rooms at a local urgent care clinic. I would see Chloe sitting at our formal mahogany dining table. The tutor would be guiding her through practice exams, while my mother hovered nearby, delivering plates of sliced fruit and imported tea. I remember walking into the kitchen one evening, wearing my faded scrubs. I needed $60 to purchase a biology textbook because the public high school had run out of issued copies. I found my father paying bills at the counter. When I showed him the syllabus and asked for the money, he did not even look up from his checkbook. He told me that character is built through financial independence and that I should pick up an extra shift if I wanted supplementary materials. 10 minutes later, I watched him hand his platinum credit card to Chloe so she could book a weekend ski trip with her friends to relieve her study stress. That was the established dynamic. Her comfort was a necessity. My basic educational needs were a burden. The division between us became a permanent chasm during the spring of her senior year. The day Chloe received her acceptance letter to Yale, my parents treated it like a royal coronation. The heavy cream-colored envelope arrived, and my mother actually wept in the foyer. They organized a catered block party that weekend to celebrate. Neighbors filled our backyard, holding crystal glasses of champagne, while a massive congratulatory banner hung over our garage doors. My father gave a speech about how hard work and pedigree always rise to the top. A year later, my own college notification arrived. It was a thin, standard envelope from a rigorous state university. Inside was an acceptance letter to their highly competitive pre-med program, along with an offer for a partial academic scholarship. I was so proud that my hands shook. I had earned that spot by studying late into the night using secondhand prep books. I brought the letter into the living room where my parents were watching television. My father took the paper from my hand. He scanned it for perhaps 3 seconds. He did not smile. He did not offer a hug. He handed the letter back to me and delivered the sentence that would define the next decade of my life. Just do not expect us to pay for it. He said it with a flat, clinical tone. He looked at me not like a daughter who had just achieved a major milestone, but like a stranger requesting an unreasonable loan. There was no block party. There was no champagne. There was only a quiet retreat to my bedroom where I filled out the financial aid paperwork by myself. My college experience was a grueling masterclass in sleep deprivation and survival. I moved into a cramped off-campus apartment sharing a single bathroom with 3 other girls. My diet consisted mostly of instant oatmeal and whatever leftover sandwiches the hospital cafeteria discarded at midnight. I worked 30 hours a week as a medical scribe, typing patient charts, while taking demanding courses in organic chemistry and physics. I studied in utility closets during my breaks. I walked through freezing rain to get to early morning labs because I could not afford a bus pass. Meanwhile, my sister lived a reality funded entirely by parental debt. Every time I opened my phone, I saw Chloe projecting an image of untouchable elite wealth. She spent her semesters abroad in Paris, posting photos from expensive cafes. She attended secret society galas, wearing silk dresses that cost more than my entire semester tuition. My mother commented on every single photo, calling her their perfect, flawless girl. I was an outsider, looking through a digital window, watching my biological family build a life designed specifically to exclude me. I tried to bridge the gap multiple times. I would call my mother on Sunday afternoons, hoping to share small victories. I wanted to tell her about passing a brutal anatomy exam or securing a clinical rotation. She would inevitably cut me off within 2 minutes, claiming she needed to help Chloe pick out floral arrangements for an upcoming sorority formal. My achievements were invisible because they lacked prestige. Despite the constant sting of rejection, a stubborn part of me still craved my family. I convinced myself that attending Chloe's graduation would fix the fracture. I thought if I showed up, played the supportive sister, and celebrated her Yale degree, my parents would finally look at me with a fraction of that same pride. That delusion drove me to a high-end stationery boutique downtown 2 weeks before her ceremony. I felt entirely out of place standing on the polished hardwood floors in my worn-out sneakers. I asked the clerk to show me their professional writing instruments. I chose a beautiful, heavy silver pen. It was a sophisticated tool meant for a graduate stepping into a prestigious career. I asked them to engrave her initials on the side. When the clerk told me the total, I counted out crumpled $20 bills at the register. I emptied my meager savings for that gift. I thought that engraved silver pen was an olive branch. I believed it proved I belonged in their circle. After my mother delivered that devastating phone call, telling me to stay home because my cheap clothes would embarrass them, I sat in my kitchen and stared at the velvet box. I packed the pen into a padded envelope and dropped it into the blue mailbox on the corner. I did not send it out of spite. I sent it because I was finally letting go of the desperate need to earn their approval. I decided I would watch the commencement ceremony on the university live stream the next morning. I wanted to see my sister walk across that stage. I wanted to feel a phantom sense of connection from hundreds of miles away. But what I witnessed on that broadcast, and the cruel text message my mother sent me hours later, would permanently extinguish any remaining loyalty I held for the people who raised me. The morning of the ceremony arrived with a heavy gray sky. I woke up at 6 a.m. inside my 300-square-foot studio apartment. The radiator hissed a constant metallic rhythm in the corner. I brewed a cup of generic instant coffee and carried it to my small folding table. My laptop was a refurbished model I had purchased from a campus surplus sale. Its cooling fan sounded like a jet engine when I opened the web browser to load the university commencement live stream. The video feed buffered 3 times before stabilizing. The screen filled with sweeping aerial views of the historic campus. Gothic architecture, stone archways, and manicured green lawns looked like a movie set. The contrast between that opulent environment and my own reality felt sharp. I sat in a faded fleece sweater while the camera panned across rows of velvet chairs and floral arrangements that likely cost more than my annual rent. I watched the procession begin. The orchestral music swelled through my cheap plastic speakers. Students marched down the center aisle wearing dark robes and bright smiles. They looked triumphant. They looked like people who had never worried about affording a textbook or paying a heating bill. I leaned closer to the screen, scanning the crowd for a familiar face. Then, the camera angle shifted to the VIP seating area near the main stage. I spotted them immediately. My parents were sitting in the second row. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, trying to reconcile the image in front of me with the financial complaints my mother constantly fed me. She was wearing a tailored designer suit in a pristine shade of ivory. A wide-brimmed hat shaded her face, and a string of authentic pearls rested against her collarbone. My father sat beside her, wearing a sharp charcoal tuxedo that fit him with custom precision. They looked wealthy. They looked like they belonged among the senators and corporate executives sharing their row. Just days earlier, my mother had claimed they were stretching every dollar to support Chloe. Yet here they were, broadcasting an image of effortless luxury. They had manufactured a flawless aesthetic for this exact moment. I watched them lean together, pointing at the stage, as Chloe's graduating class took their seats. My mother dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. My father patted her shoulder, projecting the image of a proud patriarch. They looked so happy. Despite the sting of being uninvited, a lingering instinct urged me to reach out. I still wanted to be part of the celebration. I paused the video feed when the camera focused clearly on their row. I took a screenshot of the frozen image. My hands hovered over my phone keyboard. I opened the family group chat, which had been silent for 2 days. I attached the picture and typed a simple message. So proud of you, Chloe. You both look wonderful. Sending my love from home. I pressed send. The message delivered. I set the phone face down on the table and turned my attention back to the ceremony. I watched the dean deliver a speech about integrity and the burden of privilege. I watched Chloe walk across the stage to receive her diploma. She looked radiant. Her smile was bright and practiced. My parents stood up and cheered, clapping until their hands must have hurt. I sat alone in my apartment and clapped too, a single quiet sound in an empty room. The ceremony ended shortly before noon. I spent the afternoon cleaning my tiny bathroom and organizing my flashcards for a looming biology exam. Every 10 minutes I checked my phone. The screen remained dark. I opened the group chat. The red receipts indicated that both my mother and sister had viewed the message hours ago. Neither had typed a response, not even a simple thank you. I tried to rationalize their silence. I told myself they were busy, attending prestigious luncheons, taking professional photographs, and shaking hands with important alumni. I convinced myself they would call me later in the evening, when the chaos subsided. I held on to that fragile hope as the sun set and the streetlights flickered on outside my window. By 8 o'clock that night, the silence was deafening. I sat on my futon eating a bowl of cold rice. I opened Facebook out of sheer restless habit. The algorithm immediately pushed Chloe's profile to the top of my feed. She had uploaded a new album titled The Next Chapter. The featured image was a professional portrait taken in front of a historic campus library. Chloe stood in the center holding her diploma. My mother stood on her left, beaming with manufactured perfection. My father stood on her right, with his arm wrapped securely around Chloe's shoulders. The golden hour lighting caught their smiles, making the scene look like a magazine advertisement for the ideal American family. It was the caption below the photo that felt like a knife twisting in my ribs. So blessed to have the perfect family, just the three of us against the world. Thank you for giving me everything, just the three of us. I read those 5 words over and over again. The letters blurred together. They had not just excluded me from a weekend trip, they had publicly rewritten their own history. In their curated narrative, I did not exist. I was not a struggling medical scribe or a pre-med student or a sister. I was a blank space, an omitted detail, a secret they successfully buried to protect their pristine image. I was still staring at the photograph when a notification banner dropped down from the top of my screen. It was a text message from my mother. My heart gave a brief, foolish flutter. I opened the message, expecting a belated thank you or an apology for the delay. Instead, I found a paragraph devoid of any maternal warmth. Saw you watched the stream today. I am glad you stayed home. Your discount outfits would have stood out terribly in this crowd. Chloe's friends have very elegant families. We took some beautiful photos. Please do not tag us in anything on social media today. We want to keep the focus entirely on Chloe. I read the text twice to ensure I was not misunderstanding her words. There was no misinterpretation possible. The message was a calculated mandate. She was enforcing the boundary she drew 2 days earlier, ensuring I stayed firmly in the shadows. A normal reaction might have been to burst into tears. I expected to cry. I expected to feel the familiar, crushing weight of grief that usually accompanied their rejection. But as I sat there in the dim light of my apartment, listening to the distant wail of a passing ambulance, something inside my chest simply stopped functioning. The desperation to earn their love evaporated. The yearning for a seat at their table vanished. The emotional tether that bound me to their approval snapped clean in half. I did not type a furious reply. I did not demand an explanation or hurl insults. Arguing with them would only prove that I still cared about their opinions. It would give them the satisfaction of knowing they possessed the power to hurt me. Instead, I opened my phone settings. I navigated to my mother's contact file. I pressed block. I did the same for my father. I went to Chloe's number and blocked her as well. I opened Facebook and navigated to the account deletion page. I did not just deactivate my profile. I permanently erased it. I deleted my Instagram. I removed my presence from every digital platform where they could track my existence. If they wanted a reality where they only had one daughter, I was going to give it to them. I stood up from the futon. I carried my empty bowl to the sink and washed it with deliberate focus. I packed my canvas tote bag with my stethoscope, my worn-out notebooks, and my favorite pens. I tied my scuffed sneakers tight. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold mechanical resolve. My family had explicitly told me I was not good enough for their world. They believed my state school education and my humble lifestyle made me inferior. They worshipped prestige and discarded anything that required real, unglamorous effort. I looked at myself in the small mirror by my door. The dark circles under my eyes were proof of my exhaustion, but they were also proof of my endurance. I was going to let them have their hollow aesthetic. I was going to disappear into the grueling, demanding reality of actual medicine. I stepped out of my apartment and locked the door behind me. I had a midnight shift at the hospital. I was going to walk into the chaos of the emergency room and channel every ounce of this rejection into becoming undeniable. I was going to build a future so brilliant it would blind them. And it would all start tonight under the harsh fluorescent lights of the trauma bay, waiting for a terrifying chief of surgery who would change the trajectory of my life. Going silent was not a cinematic explosion of throwing vases or screaming matches. It was a gradual fading away into the sterile fluorescent corridors of the state hospital. I changed my phone number the following Monday. I did not forward the new digits to my parents or my sister. I updated my emergency contacts at work, removing their names and listing a trusted nursing supervisor instead. The silence that followed was heavy at first, but it quickly morphed into a profound protective shield. I no longer spent my weekends waiting for a text message that would never arrive. I no longer checked social media to see which luxurious restaurant my sister was dining at while I ate day-old bread. I funneled every ounce of my leftover energy into my pre-med coursework and my night shifts as an emergency room scribe. The State Hospital Trauma Center was a literal battlefield. We saw everything the polished private clinics turned away. Uninsured accident victims, severe overdoses, and catastrophic injuries filled our bays night after night. My job was to shadow the attending physicians and document every clinical detail into the electronic medical record. Scribes are designed to be invisible. We are human recording devices, blending into the background while the real doctors perform miracles. I liked being invisible. It allowed me to absorb a vast ocean of medical knowledge without drawing attention to my frayed scrubs or the dark circles under my eyes. The undisputed sovereign of this chaotic domain was Dr. Evelyn Sterling. She was the chief of surgery, and she ruled the department with an iron grip. Dr. Sterling possessed a terrifying intellect and a reputation for breaking unprepared medical residents within their first week. She demanded perfection because her patients had no safety net. She was a tall, imposing woman with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. I admired her fiercely from a distance. She navigated the bloody, disorganized chaos of the trauma bays with the calm precision of a symphony conductor. The residents trembled when she entered a room, but the patient survival rates under her command were unparalleled. We hit the breaking point on a brutal Tuesday morning at 3 a.m. An extensive collision involving a commercial truck on the interstate flooded our department with critical patients. The air smelled like copper and antiseptic. Sirens wailed continuously outside the ambulance bay. I was assigned to shadow Dr. Sterling in Trauma Room 1, where the paramedics had just delivered a young man with severe crush injuries to his lower extremities. He was barely conscious and his blood pressure was dropping rapidly. The room was packed with frantic surgical residents barking overlapping orders, while nurses scrambled to establish intravenous access. A second-year resident, attempting to stabilize the patient, ordered a rapid infusion of succinylcholine to prepare for an emergency intubation. I stood in the corner, typing the verbal order into my rolling laptop cart. As my fingers hit the keys, my eyes flicked to the raw laboratory data populating on the overhead monitor. The initial metabolic panel for the patient had just resulted. I stared at the potassium level. It was critically elevated. The muscle breakdown from his crushed legs was flooding his bloodstream with potassium. Administering succinylcholine to a patient with severe hyperkalemia would induce immediate, lethal cardiac arrest. The resident had missed the lab value in the rush to secure the airway. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was just a scribe, earning $11 an hour. I was not supposed to diagnose. I was strictly forbidden from interrupting clinical decisions. Speaking up could result in immediate termination. I could lose my only source of income. But I looked at the young man bleeding on the stretcher, and the choice became clear. I let go of my laptop cart. I stepped through the chaotic crowd of nurses and residents until I stood directly behind Dr. Sterling. I leaned close to her ear, dropping my voice to a whisper so the rest of the room could not hear me. "Dr. Sterling," I murmured, "the potassium is already at 7.2. If they push that paralytic, his heart will stop." Dr. Sterling froze. She did not yell at me. She simply raised one gloved hand. "Stop the push," she commanded. Her voice sliced through the noise like a scalpel. The room fell instantly silent. The nurse holding the syringe paused inches from the intravenous line. Dr. Sterling looked up at the monitor, verifying the lab values I had pointed out. She turned her piercing gaze to the second-year resident who had given the order. "Switch the paralytic to rocuronium," she ordered smoothly. "Push calcium gluconate and insulin right now. We have a crush syndrome protocol to follow." The team pivoted, correcting the course. The heart rhythm stabilized. The intubation proceeded without triggering a lethal arrhythmia. The crisis passed. Dr. Sterling stepped away from the stretcher, peeling off her bloody gloves. She did not look at me or acknowledge what had just occurred. She simply pointed to the door, instructing me to follow her to the next patient. 2 hours later, the morning shift arrived to relieve us. I dragged my exhausted body into the cramped staff break room to retrieve my coat. I desperately needed to catch the early bus back to campus for an organic chemistry lecture. When I opened the door, I found Dr. Sterling sitting at the small laminate table. She was holding a cup of black coffee and waiting. The room was otherwise empty. She pointed to the plastic chair across from her. "Sit," she said. I sat down, clutching my worn canvas tote bag. Dr. Sterling studied my face with an intense, unblinking gaze. "You saved that young man today," she stated flatly. "The resident missed the crush injury protocol, but you caught it. You are a scribe. Scribes type notes. Where did you learn to interpret an acute metabolic panel like an attending physician?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady under her scrutiny. "I read the textbooks during my breaks," I explained. "I'm a pre-med student at the State University across town. I review the patient charts to understand the pathology behind the diagnoses. I want to be a surgeon." Dr. Sterling leaned forward, resting her arms on the table. "If you can read labs like that under extreme pressure, you should be applying to medical school right now. Why are you killing yourself working graveyard shifts for minimum wage?" I looked down at my scuffed sneakers. The soles were peeling away from the fabric. I did not want to share my personal humiliation, but her directness demanded honesty. "I cannot afford the medical college admission test prep courses," I admitted quietly. "I can barely cover my undergraduate tuition and my rent. The application fees alone are thousands of dollars. My family does not support my education. They prefer to invest their resources elsewhere. I am saving every dime, but it will take me another 2 years just to afford the entrance exams." Dr. Sterling scanned my cheap thrift store sweater and the dark circles bruising the skin under my eyes. She saw the entirety of my struggle in that single glance. She set her coffee cup down with a sharp thud that made me jump. Her expression shifted from intimidating to fiercely protective. "You are done waiting," she declared. She pulled a sleek black pen from her lab coat pocket and wrote a phone number on a napkin. "You possess a clinical instinct that cannot be taught in a classroom," she said, sliding the napkin across the table. "I will not watch genuine talent rot away in a scribe uniform because of a financial barrier. Pre-med is over for you, Harper. You belong in medical school, and I am going to personally make sure you get there." I took the napkin. For the first time in my life, an authority figure looked at me and saw extraordinary potential instead of an inconvenient burden. Dr. Evelyn Sterling became the mentor my own parents refused to be. She was about to force me into a secret, grueling crucible that would ultimately produce an acceptance letter capable of shattering my biological family's entire worldview. Dr. Evelyn Sterling did not offer charity. She offered a crucible. The morning after our conversation in the hospital break room, she handed me a heavy cardboard box filled with advanced medical textbooks and a binder of comprehensive study schedules. She told me I had exactly 6 months to prepare for the medical college admission test. My life transformed into a grueling marathon of endurance. I still worked my 30-hour scribe shifts and attended my undergraduate courses, but every remaining second was dedicated to the exam. I slept 4 hours a night. I ate saltine crackers and cheap peanut butter while memorizing complex biochemical pathways. When the hospital emergency room experienced a rare quiet moment, Dr. Sterling would corner me near the nurses' station and relentlessly drill me on organic chemistry equations or human anatomy. If I hesitated or provided an incorrect answer, she would make me review the entire chapter again. She demanded flawless recall. The physical toll was immense, but the psychological momentum kept me moving forward. I operated in strict isolation from my biological relatives. I had not spoken to my mother, my father, or my sister since the day I blocked their numbers. Occasionally, a well-meaning cousin or an extended relative would send me a holiday greeting containing an unsolicited update about Chloe. Those sparse messages informed me that my sister was currently living in a luxury high-rise apartment in Manhattan, funded entirely by my parents remortgaging their suburban house. She was allegedly pursuing a career as a social media influencer while attending exclusive parties. She was living a fabricated dream while I was scrubbing dried blood off my shoes and studying until my vision blurred. I deleted those messages immediately. I did not need to see her artificial success because I was busy forging an unbreakable foundation for my own future. When test day finally arrived, my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I sat in a sterile testing center, staring at a computer monitor for 7 grueling hours. The questions were designed to break candidates, to weed out the weak and the unprepared. But every time I encountered a difficult diagnostic scenario, I heard Dr. Sterling's sharp, demanding voice in my head. I visualized the chaos of the trauma bay. I remembered the exact chemical structures I had written on my forearms during my bus rides across town. When I finally submitted the exam, I felt entirely depleted. I walked out into the cold afternoon air and collapsed onto a concrete bench. I had poured every ounce of my trauma, my rejection, and my ambition into that test. Now, I just had to wait. A month later, the scores were released. I opened the digital portal with trembling hands while hiding in a supply closet at the hospital. I stared at the numbers on the screen. I had scored in the 99th percentile. I possessed one of the highest scores in the country. I showed the printout to Dr. Sterling later that evening. She did not smile, but her eyes gleamed with fierce validation. She told me I could choose any program in the nation. The application process was astronomically expensive, but Dr. Sterling personally guided me through acquiring fee assistance waivers designed for low-income students. I submitted my applications in strict secrecy. I applied to top-tier programs across the country, but there was one specific institution I targeted with a quiet, burning intensity. I applied to the Yale School of Medicine. Applying to Yale was not just an academic decision. It was a deeply personal rebellion. My mother had explicitly told me that I was an embarrassment. She claimed my cheap clothes and my state school background meant I did not belong on that historic Ivy League campus. She banished me from her pristine family image because she believed I would pollute it with my mediocrity. Submitting my application to that exact university was a silent challenge to the universe. I wanted to see if the institution my family worshipped would recognize the brilliant mind they had so casually thrown away. 6 months passed. The winter melted into a damp, unpredictable spring. I had successfully graduated from my state university program and increased my hours at the hospital to save money for upcoming relocation costs. It was a mundane Thursday afternoon. I was standing in my tiny kitchen, boiling a pot of water for cheap pasta. My laptop chimed with an incoming email notification. I wiped my wet hands on my faded jeans and walked over to the folding table. The sender address belonged to the Yale School of Medicine Admissions Committee. My lungs forgot how to process oxygen. I clicked the subject line. The message began with the word, "Congratulations." The text detailed that out of thousands of elite applicants, the faculty had selected me for admission to their incoming medical class. But the email did not stop there. The admissions committee explicitly highlighted my outstanding test scores and my extensive clinical experience in a high-volume trauma center. Because of my academic excellence and my demonstrated financial need, they were offering me a full tuition merit scholarship. They were covering everything. The institution my mother said I was too embarrassing to visit had just offered me a fully funded seat at their most prestigious table. I dropped to the cheap linoleum floor of my kitchen. I sat there with my back pressed against the humming refrigerator and wept. I did not cry out of sadness. I cried because the heavy, suffocating weight of being unlovable finally dissolved. The irony was so profound it physically knocked the breath out of me. My parents had bankrupted their future to buy my sister a temporary illusion of Ivy League prestige. They had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to manufacture a golden child. Meanwhile, the black sheep, the scapegoat they discarded over a phone call, had just conquered the very same elite world through sheer, relentless grit. I had gained entry not through a platinum credit card, but through raw, undeniable intelligence. Dr. Sterling took me out to an upscale steakhouse that weekend to celebrate the victory. It was the kind of restaurant my parents would have frequented to project an image of wealth. I sat across from my mentor, wearing the nicest blouse I owned, looking at a menu where nothing had a listed price. Dr. Sterling ordered a bottle of vintage wine and raised her glass to toast my future. She looked incredibly proud. As we ate our meal, the conversation naturally shifted toward the reality of my upcoming relocation. "Are you going to tell your biological family?" she asked, swirling the dark red liquid in her glass. "They live in Connecticut. You are about to move into their backyard and attend the most famous medical school in the world. Surely this news would force them to apologize." I set my fork down on the pristine white tablecloth. I thought about the text message my mother sent me, calling my clothes a discount rack embarrassment. I thought about the photograph of the three of them smiling without me. A year ago, I would have immediately called them to brag. I would have used this acceptance letter as a desperate plea for their validation. I would have wanted them to feel guilty. But sitting in that elegant restaurant, possessing an admission letter that changed my entire destiny, I realized something vital. Their validation was entirely worthless to me now. "No," I told Dr. Sterling, keeping my voice calm and steady. "I am not going to call them. I am not going to send an announcement. If I tell them now, they will try to claim credit for my success. They will spin a narrative about how their tough love motivated me to achieve greatness. They will try to attach themselves to my prestige, because prestige is the only currency they value. I am going to let them figure it out when the time is right. For now, I remain a ghost." Dr. Sterling smiled a slow, approving smile. She understood the power of a strategic silence. 2 months later, I packed my entire life into 3 duffel bags. I boarded a train and rode it all the way to New Haven, Connecticut. I walked onto the historic Gothic campus, not as a burdensome guest forced to hide in the shadows, but as a fully funded, brilliant medical scholar. I rented a small, quiet apartment near the hospital and activated my ghost mode. I plunged into the brutal, demanding world of human anatomy labs and rigorous clinical rotations. I was ready to become a neurosurgeon. But while I was ascending the ranks of the medical elite, the fragile financial facade my parents had built to sustain my sister's lifestyle in New York was beginning to fracture. The golden illusion was rapidly unraveling, and their desperation was about to bring them right back into my territory. The transition from an invisible scribe to a Yale medical student was a grueling baptism by fire. The air inside the university anatomy laboratories carried a permanent scent of formaldehyde and sterile stainless steel. My days began in the pitch dark at 4 in the morning and ended long after midnight under the warm glow of a desk lamp in the medical library. I was surrounded by the brightest minds in the country. Individuals who possessed generational wealth and legacy connections filled the lecture halls. Yet I never felt inferior. The human body does not care about your pedigree when it begins to fail. Disease does not respect a trust fund. I learned early that the only currency that mattered in the operating room was raw competence, and I was determined to become the wealthiest person in the room. While I was meticulously memorizing the intricate pathways of the central nervous system, the glittering post-graduation reality my sister had constructed was beginning to fracture. I observed this slow-motion disaster through a cheap $20 prepaid cellular device. Before I left my home state, I had transferred my old phone number to a disposable handset. I did not keep the device to communicate with the people who raised me. I kept it powered down in the bottom drawer of my desk, pulling it out perhaps once a month to read the archived family group text thread. I viewed the messages with the detached analytical curiosity of a scientist observing a failing ecosystem. The digital conversations painted a pathetic and desperate portrait. Following her graduation ceremony, Chloe had immediately relocated to a luxury high-rise apartment in the Tribeca neighborhood of Manhattan. She possessed an art history degree from a historic institution, but she entirely lacked the fundamental work ethic required to leverage that education. When prestigious art galleries offered her entry-level assistant positions, she rejected them outright. She complained in the group chat that fetching coffee and organizing archives was insulting to her status. Instead, she decided to pursue the glittering mirage of becoming a social media lifestyle influencer. Maintaining a curated influencer aesthetic in one of the most expensive cities on the planet required an astronomical flow of cash. The text thread revealed the exact desperate measures my parents undertook to sustain her fabricated success. The same father who had stared at my college acceptance letter and flatly told me not to expect a single dime was now hemorrhaging money to cover a Manhattan lease. He was a mid-level logistics manager who previously valued his weekend golf games above all else. According to the panicked text messages, he had begun taking consecutive overtime shifts and consulting on the side just to keep her credit cards from declining. My mother bore an even heavier burden of humiliation. She was a woman who had built her entire identity around being a lady of leisure within her pristine suburban cul-de-sac. She prided herself on hosting luncheons and arranging floral centerpieces, but the relentless demands of Chloe's lifestyle forced her hand. I read a frantic text exchange where my mother admitted she had taken a retail position at a high-end boutique in their local shopping district. She spun the employment as a fun passion project to her country club friends, claiming she just wanted to stay busy. The reality was far more degrading. She was spending her afternoons folding cashmere sweaters and steaming silk dresses for her wealthy neighbors, just to pay for her golden daughter's expensive brunch habits. I would sit in my quiet New Haven apartment, eating a bowl of cheap oatmeal, reading these dispatches from a sinking ship. The contrast was staggering. I was analyzing complex neurological scans and assisting prominent surgeons with clinical research. I was building a tangible future, inch by grueling inch. Meanwhile, Chloe was posting heavily edited photographs of $50 lattes and complaining about the toxic energy of the city. In one particularly revealing text exchange, Chloe threw a digital tantrum because a boutique hotel brand had canceled a sponsored partnership. She had missed the contract deadline because she overslept after a Tuesday night party. Instead of taking accountability, she blamed her parents for not hiring her a personal assistant. She demanded they wire her $3,000 to cover a spontaneous trip to Tulum to heal her mental health. My father responded with a rare moment of hesitation. He typed a long message explaining that they had already drained their secondary savings account. He admitted they were looking into remortgaging their suburban house just to keep the Tribeca apartment funded through the winter. He begged her to reconsider the vacation and perhaps look for a part-time consulting job. Chloe retaliated with a barrage of emotional manipulation. She accused them of not believing in her brand. She claimed that all her Ivy League peers were receiving seed money from their families to launch startup companies. She typed that if they cut off her funding, they would be personally responsible for ruining her future and embarrassing her in front of her elite social circle. The threat of embarrassment was the ultimate weapon. It was the exact same weapon my mother had used to banish me from the graduation ceremony. It worked flawlessly. 2 hours later, a new message from my mother appeared in the chat, confirming the wire transfer had been processed. They had caved. They always caved. Not once in those hundreds of panicked, demanding messages did anyone ask where I was. Nobody wondered how the state school disappointment was surviving. My absence was convenient for them. They were far too consumed with keeping their golden child afloat to notice the ghost they had left behind. But financial gravity is an inescapable force. You cannot fund a six-figure lifestyle on a middle-class income indefinitely. By the end of my second year of medical school, the precarious house of cards finally collapsed. I pulled out the burner phone on a rainy Sunday afternoon after completing a grueling 12-hour study session in the library. I plugged the device into the wall and waited for the screen to illuminate. The messages that flooded in were chaotic. The bank had officially declined a major transfer. The landlord of the Tribeca high-rise had issued a formal eviction warning due to 2 months of unpaid rent. My father had suffered a minor stress-related cardiac event that required an overnight hospital stay, forcing him to take unpaid medical leave from his logistics firm. The money well had run completely dry. Chloe was furious. She sent paragraphs of vitriol, accusing her parents of setting her up for failure. She claimed they had promised her a specific lifestyle and were now backing out of their parental obligations. My mother responded with tearful audio messages, pleading with Chloe to understand the severity of their debt. The remortgage application had been denied. The credit cards were maxed out. There was no secret reserve fund left to plunder. The final message in the thread was a cold, bitter directive from my father. He told Chloe she had exactly 48 hours to pack whatever fit into her designer luggage. He was driving a rented moving van to the city to break the lease and haul her back to their suburban home. The New York dream was over. I watched the screen fade to black. The golden child had failed. She was broke, unemployed, and retreating to her childhood bedroom. The irony tasted like sweet victory. But as I set the phone back into the desk drawer, a sobering realization washed over me. Her retreat was not just a failure. It was a geographic shift. My parents lived in Connecticut. Yale was in Connecticut. Chloe was no longer safely contained in Manhattan. She was moving right back into my territory. The impenetrable barrier of distance was dissolving. The universe was maneuvering the pieces on the board, setting the stage for an inevitable collision. And while they were drowning in suburban debt, I was preparing to step into the brightest spotlight the medical community had to offer. By my third year of medical school, the relentless pace of Yale had stripped away any lingering traces of the insecure girl who once cried over a canceled train ticket. I was no longer just surviving the academic rigor, I was thriving within it. While my peers spent their rare free weekends networking at alumni mixers or sleeping, I buried myself in the subterranean laboratories of the neuro-oncology department. I had secured a coveted position in a highly competitive research cohort focused on developing targeted genetic therapies for fatal pediatric brain tumors. The work was exhausting, demanding 80-hour weeks on top of my standard clinical coursework. I practically lived in the sterile glow of the laboratory, examining cellular slides and recording data until my vision blurred. I was fueled by a decade of being told I was mediocre. Every late night was a brick laid in the foundation of an undeniable future. Our laboratory was spearheaded by a brilliant but aging physician named Dr. Marcus Linwood. He was a pioneer in pediatric oncology, and he treated me not as a subordinate student, but as an intellectual equal. Under his guidance, our team discovered a novel enzyme inhibitor that showed unprecedented success in halting tumor growth during our initial trials. The medical community began to whisper about our findings. We were on the precipice of a breakthrough that could alter the standard of care for terminal children. However, securing the next phase of clinical trials required substantial capital. Dr. Linwood had arranged to present our preliminary data to a prestigious national medical board in Chicago, aiming to secure a $2 million research grant. The crisis struck 3 days before our scheduled flight. Dr. Linwood suffered a severe stroke. The laboratory was thrown into sheer panic. Without our lead investigator to defend the complex biochemistry in front of the grant committee, the funding was virtually guaranteed to evaporate. The pediatric trials would be suspended indefinitely. The department chair convened an emergency meeting to discuss withdrawing our application entirely. I sat at the polished mahogany conference table, listening to senior faculty members concede defeat. I did not accept defeat. I had memorized every data point, every variable, and every microscopic anomaly of that project. I raised my hand and volunteered to fly to Chicago to present the findings myself. The room fell silent. I was 26 years old and still a medical student. Proposing that a student address a board of the most intimidating diagnostic minds in the country was unheard of. The department chair frowned, citing my lack of credentials. But I opened my laptop and projected our data onto the screen, walking the faculty through the intricate genetic sequencing without glancing at a single note. I spoke with the cold clinical precision I had honed during my years as a trauma scribe. When I finished, the chair simply nodded. I was handed a plane ticket the next morning. The magnitude of the situation hit me when I walked into the Chicago Conference Center. The ballroom was cavernous, filled with hundreds of seasoned physicians, researchers, and pharmaceutical executives wearing dark, tailored suits. The air conditioning was freezing, but my palms were slick with sweat. I stood near the backstage curtain reviewing my digital slides. A familiar wave of imposter syndrome threatened to surface. A toxic echo of my mother's voice whispered that I did not belong in this elite room, that I was an embarrassment wearing a borrowed blazer. Then a hand rested on my shoulder. I turned and found Dr. Evelyn Sterling standing behind me. She had flown out from Connecticut on her only day off just to sit in the audience. "You have survived worse than a room full of skeptical doctors," she told me, her voice an anchor in the swirling anxiety. "You survived the people who tried to convince you that you were worthless. Now go out there and show them exactly what you are." Her words severed the tether to my past. I squared my shoulders and walked onto the brightly lit stage. I stepped up to the podium and adjusted the microphone. I did not look at my notes. I looked directly into the sea of expectant faces and began to speak. For 45 minutes, I deconstructed our enzyme inhibitor data. I explained the cellular mechanisms, the mortality projections, and the profound implications for pediatric survival rates. When the panel of judges began their interrogation, I fielded their intense questioning with calm, factual rebuttals. I anticipated their doubts and dismantled them using peer-reviewed statistics. I commanded that room not with unearned confidence, but with the armor of relentless preparation. When I concluded the presentation and clicked to the final slide, the silence in the ballroom was palpable. Then the applause began. It started in the front row and swelled into a standing ovation. I looked down and saw Dr. Sterling clapping, her eyes shining with fierce pride. I had not just defended the research, I had conquered the room. The aftermath of that trip accelerated my career beyond my wildest projections. The National Board awarded our laboratory the full $2 million grant without hesitation. 2 months later, a premier medical journal published our findings. My name was listed as the co-lead author, right next to Dr. Linwood. At 26 years old, I was recognized as a rising star within the neurosurgical community. I was receiving fellowship inquiries from renowned institutions across the globe. My reality was a stark, breathtaking contrast to the narrative my biological family clung to. While they were drowning in suburban debt and orchestrating a frantic retreat from New York City, I was shaking hands with the pioneers of modern medicine. I possessed a level of genuine elite prestige that my parents had bankrupted themselves trying to artificially purchase for my sister, and yet I remained a total ghost to them. They had no idea that the daughter they banished for being an embarrassment was currently featured on the cover of a journal sitting in their local doctor's waiting room. I relished the secrecy. My success was a private fortress. But the sanctuary of the research laboratory could only protect me for so long. As my third year concluded, I was required to begin my advanced clinical rotations. This meant leaving the microscopes behind and stepping back onto the unpredictable floors of the university hospital. It meant interacting with the general public, treating local residents, and navigating the crowded waiting rooms of New Haven. I knew the statistical probability of a collision was increasing. Chloe was moving back to Connecticut. My parents were financially tethered to the area. I was donning my white coat every morning with my name and credentials embroidered in stark blue thread, walking the halls of the primary medical facility for the entire region. The impenetrable wall I had built around my new life was about to be tested. The universe was tightening the geographic circle around us, setting the stage for a forced reunion I had spent 5 years avoiding. The sterile safety of my academic world was about to collide abruptly with the messy, unresolved reality of my bloodline during a routine Tuesday shift on the cardiology ward. The sanctuary of the research laboratory could only isolate me for a finite period before the university curriculum demanded my return to the clinical front lines. My 4th year of medical school required completing an acting internship, also known as a sub-internship. This phase of training was designed to push students to their absolute physical and mental limits. I was no longer shadowing physicians from a safe distance. I was operating with the responsibilities of a first-year resident. I carried a pager, wore a long white coat embroidered with the Yale School of Medicine crest, and made critical diagnostic decisions under the intense scrutiny of senior attending doctors. I was assigned to the cardiology telemetry floor at Yale New Haven Hospital for the month of October. The ward was a high-stakes environment, filled with the constant rhythmic beeping of heart monitors and the urgent, hushed conversations of medical staff navigating life-or-death scenarios. I thrived in that high-pressure atmosphere. The clinical environment demanded pure merit. Your lineage and your bank account were irrelevant when a patient coded. The only things that mattered were your knowledge, your speed, and your resilience. I had forged those traits in the fires of my own isolation. It was a mundane Tuesday afternoon when the fragile barrier between my professional fortress and my toxic biological past finally shattered. The emergency department had been funneling patients to our floor all morning. I was sitting at the central nursing station, updating an electronic chart, when the senior resident approached my desk. He dropped a fresh admission file onto the counter. He told me the patient was a male in his late 50s, admitted for acute angina and suspected minor ischemia. The emergency room had stabilized him, but he needed a comprehensive cardiac workup to rule out a severe myocardial infarction. I nodded, grabbed my stethoscope, and opened the manila folder to review the demographic intake forms. The printed text on the top line of the page hit my chest like a physical blow. Patient name, Richard Myers. My lungs seized. The ambient noise of the hospital, the ringing telephones, the chatter of the nurses, the squeaking wheels of medication carts vanished into a ringing vacuum. I stared at the birth date. I stared at the home address listed in a familiar Connecticut suburb. It was not a coincidence. It was not a shared name. The man lying in a hospital bed on my assigned ward was my father. A wave of visceral adrenaline flooded my bloodstream. I traced my finger over the intake notes. The triage physician documented that the patient reported experiencing severe radiating chest pain following a prolonged period of extreme psychosocial stress and financial anxiety. The pieces snapped together with cruel precision. The remortgaged house, the failed New York City apartment, The mountain of credit card debt generated to fund my sister's fabricated influencer lifestyle had literally broken his heart. The stress of maintaining their pristine suburban illusion had culminated in a cardiac event. I closed the folder. My hands were trembling slightly. For 5 years, I had operated as a ghost. I had built an entirely new identity from the ground up without their knowledge or their financial support. I stood up from the desk and smoothed the lapels of my white coat. The embroidered Yale insignia felt heavy against my chest. I looked down the long, polished linoleum corridor toward room 412. Every step I took down that hallway felt like wading through deep water. The internal battle raging inside my mind was deafening. Part of me, the wounded 15-year-old girl who cried over a train ticket, wanted to push those heavy wooden doors open and bask in their shock. I wanted my mother to see the cheap state school embarrassment standing in front of her, holding medical authority over her husband's life. I wanted to watch them process the undeniable reality that the daughter they discarded was now wearing the most prestigious uniform in the building. The temptation of that immediate, brutal vindication was a bitter nectar pooling in the back of my throat. I reached the threshold of room 412. The heavy wooden door was cracked open a few inches, allowing a sliver of fluorescent light and the sound of voices to spill into the hallway. I stopped moving. I pressed my back against the cool plaster wall beside the doorframe and listened. The familiar shrill cadence of my mother's voice drifted through the gap. She was not crying. She was not expressing relief that her husband had survived a cardiac scare. Instead, she was launching a bitter complaint at a junior floor nurse. I simply do not understand why it takes 45 minutes to get a decent cup of ice, my mother snapped, her tone dripping with unearned elitism. My husband is a priority patient. He needs to be comfortable, and this chair is incredibly stiff. We have excellent private insurance. Is there a VIP suite available on a higher floor? I closed my eyes. Her desperate need to project superiority remained entirely intact, even while her husband lay attached to electrocardiogram wires. She was standing in a hospital, facing the literal consequences of their financial ruin, yet she was still performing for an invisible audience. Then another voice sliced through the tension in the room. It was Chloe. "Mom, can we please just hurry this up?" Chloe whined. Her voice possessed the exact same petulant pitch she utilized as a teenager when I took too long in the shared bathroom. "I have a dinner reservation at a new fusion restaurant downtown in an hour. My followers are expecting a review. It is not like he is actually dying. He just had a panic attack or whatever. I cannot sit in this depressing room all night." The sheer, breathtaking callousness of the statement froze the blood in my veins. My father was undergoing a cardiac evaluation for acute ischemia. He was hospitalized because he bankrupted himself trying to sustain her failures. And Chloe was annoyed because his medical emergency was interfering with her dinner reservation and her artificial social media presence. I waited for the inevitable reprimand. I waited for my mother to finally discipline the monster they had created. I waited for her to defend her husband. Instead, I heard the rustle of fabric as my mother likely leaned over to placate her golden child. "I know, sweetheart," my mother cooed, her voice instantly softening into an apologetic purr. "I am so sorry this is ruining your evening. The service here is just dreadful. Go ahead and take the rental car. I will make sure the doctor discharges him as soon as possible so we are not a burden to your schedule." My hand, which had been hovering inches from the metal doorknob, slowly dropped to my side. The epiphany was cold and absolute. I had spent the brief walk down the corridor agonizing over whether I should reveal my success to them. I had debated if they were capable of feeling remorse, but listening to that brief, horrifying exchange provided all the closure I would ever need. The sickness infecting my biological family was terminal. No amount of Ivy League credentials, prestigious awards, or medical degrees would ever alter their twisted hierarchy. Chloe would always be the undisputed priority. Her superficial comfort would always eclipse the literal health and survival of anyone else in the room. If I walked into that room, I would not be victorious. I would be stepping back into a toxic cycle that would drain my energy and distract me from my purpose. They would try to weaponize my success. My mother would immediately demand I use my influence to secure them a better room. Chloe would resent my authority. The revelation would be messy, chaotic, and ultimately unfulfilling. A hospital room was far too intimate for the final severing of ties. The stage was simply not big enough. I took a slow, silent step backward. I turned away from the cracked door and walked back down the corridor toward the central nursing station. My heart rate leveled out. The residual anxiety evaporated, leaving behind a profound, crystal-clear focus. I located a fellow medical student, a dedicated resident named David, who was reviewing a chart nearby. "David," I said, tapping his shoulder, "I need to swap patients with you. Bed 412 is a conflict of interest. I know the family from my past, and I cannot remain objective." David looked at my face, recognized the rigid professional boundary I was drawing, and nodded without asking for probing details. He handed me his admission file and took my father's folder. The exchange took less than 10 seconds. I spent the remainder of my shift treating strangers with the meticulous care my own family was incapable of providing. I did not look back toward that room. My father was discharged the following morning with a prescription for beta blockers and a strict warning to reduce his stress levels. They returned to their crumbling suburban facade, completely unaware that the ghost of their discarded daughter had been standing inches away, holding the power to expose their entire fraudulent existence. The near miss solidified my strategy. I did not want a quiet confrontation in a sterile hallway. I wanted a public reckoning. I wanted an undeniable arena where their lies could not protect them and their manufactured image would shatter under the weight of my reality. The universe seemingly agreed with my newfound patience because 3 months later, the residency matching algorithm and the medical school faculty committee would hand me the ultimate weapon. They were going to give me a microphone. March arrived in New England with its typical biting wind and gray skies. For fourth-year medical students across the country, March holds a singular, terrifying milestone known as Match Day. This is the exact moment an algorithmic system determines where you will spend the next 7 grueling years of your life completing your surgical residency. It is the culmination of every sleepless night, every missed meal, and every brutal examination. The courtyard of the medical campus was packed with my peers holding crisp, white envelopes. The atmosphere was thick with frantic energy. Most of the students were surrounded by their families. I watched parents weeping with joy, holding expensive bouquets of flowers and popping imported champagne to celebrate their children. I stood near the edge of the brick courtyard, holding my sealed envelope, alone. I did not feel lonely. The isolation I once viewed as a curse had become my greatest armor. I did not need an audience to validate my worth. I slid my finger under the paper flap and tore the envelope open. I pulled out the single sheet of official university letterhead. My eyes scanned past the formal greeting and landed directly on the bold text in the center of the page. Yale New Haven Hospital, Department of Neurosurgery. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for half a decade. I had secured one of the most guarded fortresses in the entire medical field. New surgery programs only accepted a fraction of a percent of applicants nationwide. I had matched at my top choice, remaining exactly where I had built my kingdom. The statistical improbability of my journey washed over me. A struggling state school undergraduate who used to scrape coins together for subway fare was officially stepping into the most elite surgical tier on the planet. I folded the paper, slipped it into my coat pocket, and walked back to the hospital to finish my shift. The real shock, however, arrived 2 weeks later. I received a formal email from the executive assistant to the dean of the Yale School of Medicine, requesting my immediate presence in his office. A summons from the dean usually meant one of 2 things for a student. You were either facing a severe disciplinary hearing, or you were receiving a distinguished commendation. I reviewed my clinical logs, confirming my records were flawless, before walking across the campus. The administrative building was a monument to historical prestige. The hallways were lined with oil portraits of legendary physicians, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. I approached the heavy oak doors, and the secretary ushered me inside. The dean was a formidable man with decades of institutional authority radiating from his posture. He stood up from behind his expansive mahogany desk and gestured for me to sit in a leather wingback chair. He did not engage in trivial small talk. He opened a thick, leather-bound portfolio on his desk, which I recognized as my academic and clinical file. "Dr. Myers," he began, using my future title with deliberate respect. "I have spent the morning reviewing your trajectory within this institution. Your file is, quite frankly, an anomaly." I sat perfectly still, maintaining eye contact. I waited for him to elaborate. "You arrived here without the traditional pedigree," he continued, turning a page in the portfolio. "You did not attend an Ivy League undergraduate program. You did not possess legacy connections. Yet you stepped into our neuro-oncology laboratories and co-authored a breakthrough trial that secured a $2 million national grant. You flew to Chicago and defended complex genetic sequencing in front of the most intimidating diagnostic board in the country. Your clinical scores consistently rank at the very top of your cohort." He closed the portfolio and folded his hands on top of it. "The faculty held a comprehensive voting session yesterday afternoon to determine the student keynote speaker for the upcoming commencement ceremony. It is a tradition reserved for the individual who best exemplifies the core values of this medical school. We look for intellect, certainly, but more importantly, we look for unwavering resilience. The vote was unanimous. We want you to deliver the address to your graduating class." The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy, warm blanket. The student keynote speaker was the highest honor a graduating candidate could receive. It meant standing at a podium broadcasting your voice to thousands of people, setting the thematic tone for a new generation of physicians. It was the ultimate platform. "I am deeply honored," I replied, my voice remaining steady despite the rapid pounding of my heart. "I will not let the faculty down." "I know you will not," the dean smiled briefly. "Draft your speech and submit it to my office for review by the first week of May. Congratulations, Harper. You have earned every inch of this." I walked out of the administrative building and immediately pulled my phone from my pocket. There was only one person in the world who deserved to hear this news first. I dialed Dr. Evelyn Sterling. She answered on the second ring, barking a sharp greeting over the background noise of the surgical intensive care unit. I asked her to step into a quiet hallway. When I relayed the conversation I just had with the dean, the line went completely silent. For a long, terrifying second, I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard a sound I had never heard in the 5 years I had known her. The fierce, terrifying chief of surgery was crying. "I found you in a trauma bay typing notes for minimum wage," she whispered, her voice thick with raw emotion. "You were so tired and wearing those awful scuffed shoes. And now you are going to speak for the entire Yale School of Medicine? I have never been more proud of another human being in my entire life." Her tears broke the final lingering remnants of my imposter syndrome. I went back to my quiet apartment that evening and opened a blank document on my laptop. I stared at the flashing cursor. I had a platform, and I needed to decide exactly what message I wanted to send into the universe. I spent the next 3 weeks writing, drafting, and revising. I poured every ounce of my journey into those paragraphs. I did not write a generic speech about the nobility of healing or the bright future of science. I wrote about the anatomy of rejection. I wrote about the patients who fall through the cracks of a flawed system and the vital importance of seeing the potential in people whom society has deemed unworthy. I typed sentences about the concept of the empty chair. I explained that when the world denies you a seat at their prestigious table, you do not stand in the corner and beg for scraps. You walk away, you gather your own wood, and you build a better table. I focused on the individuals who look past superficial credentials and recognize the raw, unpolished grit beneath the surface. I was writing a love letter to the mentor who saved me and a definitive closing chapter to the biological family who threw me away. I submitted the final draft to the dean on a rainy Tuesday morning. He reviewed the document and sent it back with a single note attached. He wrote that it was the most powerful commencement draft he had read during his tenure. The manuscript was locked in. The date was set for the final week of May. I printed a hard copy of the speech and placed it on my kitchen counter. I looked around my small, peaceful apartment. 5 years ago, I stood in a similarly cramped kitchen, holding a non-refundable train ticket, listening to my mother tell me I was an embarrassment. She had banned me from setting foot on the Yale campus because my presence would tarnish their elite aesthetic. Now the leadership of that exact institution was handing me a microphone and begging me to speak. I felt a profound sense of closure. I assumed my parents and my sister were somewhere in their Connecticut suburb, dealing with the grim reality of their financial collapse. I imagined they were living a quiet, bitter life, far removed from the glittering world they once desperately chased. I was prepared to step onto that stage and deliver my truth to an audience of strangers. I had no idea that the universe possessed a razor-sharp sense of irony. I had no idea that my sister, having exhausted every financial resource and every bridge in New York City, had recently accepted a humiliating entry-level position. And I certainly had no idea that her new employer was the Yale University Events Management Team. The invisible strings of fate were pulling tight, orchestrating a bizarre, inescapable twist that was about to place my abusers directly into the third row of my audience. While I was meticulously refining the syllables of my commencement address, the universe was quietly engineering a masterclass in poetic justice. My sister's return to our suburban hometown was not a peaceful period of reflection. It was a chaotic descent into financial reality. Chloe had exhausted her options. She had spent the last several months applying to prestigious gallery director positions and elite public relations firms across the state. She was summarily rejected by every single one. Her resume consisted of a costly undergraduate degree and a documented history of taking photographs of expensive brunch plates in Manhattan. She possessed zero tangible skills. The bank accounts were empty. My father, recovering from his stress-induced cardiac scare, finally laid down a strict, non-negotiable ultimatum. The bank of Mom and Dad was permanently closed. Chloe had to secure immediate employment or face eviction from her childhood bedroom. The genuine threat of having nowhere to sleep forced her to drastically lower her standards. Desperate for a paycheck, she applied for a logistical opening at the very institution she once treated as her personal playground. She was hired as a junior assistant for the Yale University Events Management Team. This was not a glamorous position. It was grueling, invisible labor. Her daily responsibilities involved dragging heavy boxes of printed programs across campus, organizing hundreds of folding chairs for outdoor lectures, and managing frantic catering deliveries. The girl who once scoffed at entry-level gallery work because it was beneath her was now wearing a polyester polo shirt and a plastic name badge, sweating under the New England sun. I discovered this dramatic shift in her employment status during one of my rare check-ins on the prepaid burner phone. I sat at my kitchen counter one evening and opened the family group thread. My mother could not stomach the humiliating truth of her golden child performing manual labor. It shattered the illusion of superiority she had spent 2 decades cultivating. So she did what she always did. She reinvented reality to suit her narrative. My mother had uploaded a lengthy post to her social media circles. The text read that she was incredibly proud of Chloe for securing a highly competitive administrative role at the Yale School of Medicine. She claimed Chloe was managing elite medical events and practically running the department. The delusion was staggering. My sister was setting up microphone stands and tying decorative ribbons on plastic chairs, but my mother had spun it into an executive achievement. I read the post and set the phone down feeling a profound sense of irony. Chloe was not running the medical school. She was working in the shadows of the exact arena where I was preparing to take the center stage. The events management team handled dozens of ceremonies across the sprawling campus during the month of May. By a twist of logistical fate, Chloe was assigned to work the medical school commencement. The university offered a standard perk for the administrative staff working these exhausting weekend shifts. Each employee received 3 complimentary VIP tickets for their family members to sit in a designated reserved section near the front of the auditorium. It was a gesture of goodwill to compensate for the long hours. My mother naturally seized the opportunity to maintain her wealthy facade. According to the text thread, she and my father were treating these complimentary tickets like invitations to a royal gala. They had booked a hotel room near the campus. They were planning to attend the ceremony, sit in the VIP section, and take photographs to prove they still belonged among the academic elite. They were flying blind into a hurricane of their own making, entirely oblivious to whose graduation they were actually attending. I only discovered the trap had been set 2 weeks before the ceremony. I walked into the university events office on a quiet Thursday afternoon to finalize the stage mechanics for my speech. The director of the department, a meticulous man named Gregory, greeted me with a warm, professional smile. He unrolled a large architectural blueprint of the main auditorium across his desk. We spent 20 minutes discussing the microphone placement, the lighting cues, and the exact timing of my walk to the podium. When we finished the technical details, Gregory handed me a thick, stapled packet of paper. It was the master guest list and the seating chart for the first 5 rows. Dr. Myers, he said, pointing to the first page, we want to ensure your personal guests have premium visibility. If you have any specific seating requests for your family or mentors, please let me know now so I can block out those chairs. I took the packet from his hands. I wanted to verify that Dr. Sterling was seated directly on the center aisle, where she would have a clear line of sight. I scanned the names listed in the first row, finding her designation. Then I flipped to the second page to review the overflow VIP section. My finger traced down the columns of printed text. I moved past the names of prominent donors and visiting politicians. I reached the section labeled Staff Accommodations. My lungs forgot how to process oxygen. My finger stopped moving. There, printed in stark black ink, were the names of my abusers. Row 3, Seat A, Richard Myers. Seat B, Sandra Myers. Seat C, Chloe Myers. The ambient noise of the busy office faded into a distant hum. I stared at the letters spelling out my father's name. I stared at my mother's name. I felt the smooth texture of the paper beneath my thumb. This was not a coincidence. This was not a mistake. They were coming. They were going to put on their expensive clothes and sit 30 feet away from the podium. They were expecting to watch a parade of strangers receive their medical degrees. They were expecting to spend the afternoon taking selfies in the auditorium lobby to post on the internet, maintaining their hollow aesthetic. They had no idea that the keynote speaker, listed simply as the distinguished student representative on the preliminary programs, was the daughter they threw away. I stood in the office holding the packet. A terrifying electric thrill coursed through my veins. I possessed the power to cancel their tickets right then and there. I could have looked at Gregory, pointed to their row, and claimed a security conflict. I could have erased them from the event with a single sentence. I could have protected my peace and ensured they never saw my face. But I looked at the blueprint of the stage. I thought about the $150 train ticket I had purchased 5 years ago. I thought about the cruel phone call telling me my clothes were too cheap and my presence was too embarrassing. I thought about the endless, grueling night shifts, the sleep deprivation, the hunger, and the relentless determination it took to build my own table. I handed the packet back to Gregory. The seating arrangement is perfect, I told him, my voice steady and cold. I do not need to change a single thing. I walked out of the events office and stepped into the bright spring sunlight. The final piece of the puzzle had locked into place without me having to lift a finger. The universe had orchestrated a public reckoning that no amount of social media spin could ever undo. My biological family was going to walk willingly into an arena where their lies held no power. The days leading up to the ceremony passed in a blur of final exams and clinical handoffs. I did not feel anxious. I felt the calm, calculated precision of a surgeon preparing to make the first incision. I had my speech memorized. I had my tailored suit pressed. And I had a piece of evidence resting on my desk that would serve as the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. The morning of May 24th broke with a clear blue sky. It was time to put on the velvet robes. It was time to walk onto the stage. And it was time to let the golden child and her enablers finally meet the ghost they created. The 24th of May dawned with the kind of crisp golden sunlight that felt intentionally cinematic. I stood inside my quiet apartment, facing the full-length mirror mounted on my closet door. 5 years ago, I stood in this exact spot, staring at a frightened, exhausted 23-year-old girl who was weeping over a canceled train ticket and a cheap clearance rack dress. The person staring back at me today was entirely unrecognizable. I was wrapping the heavy black folds of my doctoral gown around my shoulders. The fabric possessed a distinct weight. I adjusted the thick, dark blue velvet hood, indicating my doctorate in medicine. The Yale University seal was embroidered over my chest, serving as a tangible, undeniable emblem of my survival. I traced the intricate stitching with my index finger. I had not purchased this honor with a platinum credit card or a parental bailout. I had paid for this uniform with 1,000 sleepless nights, with grueling trauma shifts, and with a relentless refusal to remain the invisible scapegoat of my bloodline. While I fastened the final button of my academic regalia, my mind drifted toward a hotel room a few miles away. I visualized my mother standing in front of a similar mirror. I knew her routine. She was likely steaming a designer suit she could not afford, spraying expensive perfume, and practicing her aristocratic smile. My father was probably adjusting a silk tie, complaining about the Hotel Continental breakfast. They were preparing to attend a prestigious Ivy League event as VIP guests. They were marching straight into a carefully constructed snare, convinced they were the elite spectators of someone else's triumph. A sharp knock at my front door interrupted my thoughts. I smoothed the front of my gown and turned the deadbolt. Dr. Evelyn Sterling stood in the hallway. She was wearing her own academic robes, denoting her status as the chief of surgery and senior faculty. The dark green velvet of her surgical discipline draped elegantly over her shoulders. She looked formidable and exceptionally proud. She stepped into my living room and analyzed me from head to toe. Her piercing eyes, the same eyes that used to terrify medical residents, softened into a warm, profound approval. "You look like a conqueror," Dr. Sterling stated, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet space. I walked over to the kitchen island to retrieve my leather clipboard. "I feel like one," I replied. Dr. Sterling crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe. She knew the entire layout of the seating chart. We had discussed the explosive potential of this morning over coffee 3 days prior. She knew my abusers were currently navigating the campus traffic to sit 30 feet away from the podium. "Are you nervous?" she asked, watching my hands to see if they trembled. I looked down at my steady fingers. "No," I answered truthfully. "Nervousness implies a fear of the unknown. I already know exactly how this will end. I have spent 5 years rehearsing for this exact moment. I am just ready to deliver the diagnosis." Dr. Sterling smiled a slow, razor-sharp smile. "Then let us go cure the infection," she said. Before we walked out the door, I needed to make one final adjustment to my keynote manuscript. I reached into the front pocket of my canvas tote bag and pulled out a heavy silver pen. The metal was cold against my palm. This was not just a random writing instrument. It was the exact same silver pen I had purchased 5 years ago as a graduation gift for Chloe. The pen I had drained my meager savings to buy. The pen I had mailed to her in a desperate final plea for sisterly connection after my mother uninvited me from her ceremony. The universe has a remarkable way of returning your discarded sacrifices. I had recovered this pen just 1 week prior, under circumstances that felt almost fictional. I was walking through the administrative corridors of the Events Management Building, heading toward the stage design office. In the hallway, there was a large plastic bin, labeled for charitable donation and custodial disposal. It was filled with forgotten umbrellas, cheap lanyards, and abandoned office supplies left behind by the temporary event staff. As I walked past the bin, a glint of polished silver caught my eye. I stopped and reached into the plastic crate. I pulled out a familiar object. I turned the cold metal over in my hand and read the intricate engraving etched into the side. The letters C.M. were stamped into the steel. Chloe Myers. My sister had not kept my gift in a desk drawer. She had not even bothered to leave it in her childhood bedroom. She had carried it to her humiliating new job, perhaps intending to use it as a prop to look professional, and then casually discarded it in a literal trash bin. She threw away the symbol of my sacrifice at the exact institution where I was currently dominating the medical field. Finding that pen did not hurt me. The sting of her disrespect had faded years ago. Instead, finding the engraved silver instrument provided a profound sense of clarity. It was a tangible reminder of why I chose to remain a ghost. They did not value my efforts. They only valued things that elevated their own status. I clicked the silver pen open in my apartment. I pressed the ballpoint tip against the crisp white paper of my printed speech. I made a single, deliberate underline beneath the final sentence of my closing paragraph. Then I clipped the engraved pen to the top of the leather clipboard right next to the microphone icon. I wanted it visible. I wanted to hold the physical manifestation of their cruelty in my hand while I dismantled their fragile reality. It is time I told Dr. Sterling. We exited the apartment and stepped into the cool morning air. The walk to the main auditorium felt like a victory lap. The campus was swarming with activity. Families wearing their Sunday best crowded the sidewalks, taking photographs beneath the historic stone archways. Vendors sold overpriced floral bouquets and commemorative university merchandise. It was a sea of chaotic, joyful noise. I moved through the crowd with Dr. Sterling flanking my right side. My dark blue medical hood signaled my status, causing underclassmen and parents to instinctively part ways, granting us a clear path. I did not shrink away from the attention. I absorbed it. I walked with the straight spine of a woman who had earned every single inch of the ground beneath her feet. We approached the imposing Gothic architecture of the primary commencement hall. The heavy wooden doors were propped wide open, swallowing hundreds of guests into the cavernous interior. Security guards checked tickets and directed the attendees to their designated sections. We bypassed the main public entrance and navigated toward the discreet faculty staging area located near the rear loading dock. The backstage corridors were quiet, filled only with the hushed, tense whispers of the university administration preparing for the broadcast. The event director, Gregory, met us near the curtain. He handed me a wireless lapel microphone and confirmed the audio channels were clear. "We are running right on schedule, Dr. Myers," Gregory whispered, checking his digital tablet. "The student body is seated. The faculty will process in 5 minutes. You are slated to speak immediately after the dean delivers his opening remarks. The VIP section is at maximum capacity." I nodded, allowing the audio technician to thread the microphone wire beneath the collar of my velvet robe. I stepped toward the heavy velvet curtain separating the staging area from the main stage. I pulled the dense fabric back just a fraction of an inch to peer into the auditorium. The room was breathtaking. Thousands of chairs arranged in perfect geometric lines filled the expansive floor. The murmur of the immense crowd echoed against the vaulted ceiling, creating a low, continuous roar of anticipation. The bright theatrical lighting illuminated the front rows with a harsh, brilliant clarity. My eyes scanned past the first row of faculty chairs and locked onto the reserved staff accommodations section. Row 3. The snare was officially primed. I saw the ivory fabric of a designer hat. I saw the rigid posture of a man trying to look wealthy in a rented tuxedo. And I saw a girl wearing a cheap staff lanyard, looking incredibly bored, staring at her phone. The moment I had spent 5 years earning was separated from me by a single piece of fabric. The ghost was about to step into the light. The heavy velvet curtain parted, allowing the grand orchestral march to flood the backstage corridor. The ceremony had officially begun. I stepped out from the shadows and joined the procession of senior faculty and distinguished guests walking in single file toward the elevated platform. The sheer scale of the auditorium was staggering. Thousands of faces turned toward us, a sea of expectant families and proud parents holding cameras. The bright theatrical spotlights generated an intense heat that beat down on my shoulders, but the heavy fabric of my doctoral gown felt like an impenetrable suit of armor. I followed the event director to my assigned seat, located in the center of the stage, directly next to the dean of the medical school. I sat down and folded my hands neatly in my lap. From this elevated vantage point, I possessed a panoramic view of the entire room. I did not need to search for them. I already knew their exact coordinates. My eyes bypassed the ecstatic families in the front rows and locked onto the third row of the staff accommodations section. They were sitting exactly where the seating chart indicated. My mother was aggressively fanning herself with a rolled-up program. Her face carried that familiar expression of haughty dissatisfaction, a look she always wore when the environment failed to meet her impossible aristocratic standards. She was wearing a tailored ivory suit that probably cost a month of my former grocery budget. Beside her, my father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, pulling at the collar of his stiff, rented tuxedo. Chloe sat on his other side, slouching in her folding chair. She was wearing her cheap event staff polo shirt, hidden underneath a light cardigan, staring blankly at her glowing phone screen. Watching them from the stage provided a surreal psychological clarity. They believed they were invisible, blending into the sophisticated crowd. They thought they were the main characters of a glamorous narrative, observing the achievements of strangers. They had spent their entire lives treating me like a burdensome extra in their family portrait. Now the roles were permanently reversed. I was seated on a literal throne of academic triumph, looking down at the architects of my deepest childhood trauma. The orchestral music faded into a dignified silence. The dean stood up, adjusted his academic hood, and walked to the wooden rostrum. He tapped the microphone once, sending a low thud echoing across the cavernous hall. He welcomed the audience and began his opening remarks. He spoke eloquently about the grueling nature of medical training, the sacrifices required to heal others, and the sacred trust placed in the hands of physicians. Then he paused, resting his hands on the edges of the podium. He transitioned into the introduction for the student keynote speaker. Every year, this institution selects one graduating candidate to represent the highest ideals of the Yale School of Medicine, the dean announced, his voice carrying a profound gravity. We look for intellect, but more importantly, we look for unyielding grit. The individual speaking today did not arrive on this campus with a lineage of legacy connections or inherited wealth. In the third row, I watched my father nod slightly in agreement with the dean's words, playing the role of the appreciative intellectual. He had no idea the man at the podium was talking about the child he refused to support. This student spent her early years working brutal graveyard shifts in a state hospital trauma center, the dean continued. She joined our neuro-oncology department and co-authored groundbreaking research that secured a $2 million national grant to fight pediatric brain tumors. She stood before the National Medical Board and defended complex genetic sequencing with the precision of a seasoned attending physician. She embodies the resilience required to change the world. Please welcome to the microphone the valedictorian of our neurosurgery residency match, Dr. Harper Myers. The polite, enthusiastic applause began to ripple through the room. I stood up from my chair. I picked up my leather clipboard with the silver pen clipped to the top. I walked slowly toward the center of the stage. My eyes never left the third row. I wanted to witness the exact sequence of their realization. Chloe reacted first. She heard her own last name echoing through the audio system. Her head snapped up from her phone. She squinted against the bright stage lights, trying to focus on the figure walking toward the podium. When her eyes finally adjusted and recognized my face, her jaw dropped open. The cellular phone slipped from her fingers and hit the concrete floor with a sharp clatter. My mother turned her head, annoyed by the sound of the dropping phone. She looked at Chloe and then followed her daughter's terrified gaze up to the brightly lit stage. The transformation of my mother's face was a masterpiece of instant devastation. The artificial, haughty confidence vanished in a millisecond. All the color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a mask of pure, chalky panic. Her hands began to tremble so violently that the printed program fell from her lap. She grabbed my father's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the fabric of his tuxedo. My father looked up. He froze. His posture went entirely rigid. He gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning stark white, as if bracing for a physical impact. I reached the podium. The applause died down, leaving a heavy, expectant silence hovering over the crowd. I unclipped the engraved silver pen and set it down on the wooden ledge right next to the microphone. I looked directly into my mother's pale, terrified eyes. I did not glare. I did not frown. I offered her a calm, clinical smile. "Good morning," I said. My voice projected across the massive hall, clear and unwavering. I looked down at my manuscript, but I did not need to read the words. I knew them by heart. 5 years ago, I was explicitly instructed to stay away from this exact university campus. I began the cadence of my speech echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I was told by the people who raised me that my presence would be a humiliating embarrassment. I was told that my state school background, my financial struggles, and my discount clothing disqualified me from sitting among the elite. I was told to remain hidden so I would not tarnish a manufactured family aesthetic. A collective gasp rippled through the front rows of the audience. The parents and faculty members leaned forward, suddenly realizing this was not a standard commencement address praising the nobility of science. This was a surgical extraction of truth. Today, I stand before you, graduating at the very top of my class as a neurosurgeon. I continued my gaze, remaining locked on my paralyzed biological relatives. I did not buy my way onto this stage. I earned every single inch of this platform through relentless, exhausting labor. I shifted my focus to the rest of the graduating class, addressing my peers. Many of you in this room understand the heavy burden of the empty chair, I said, gripping the edges of the podium. You understand what it feels like when the world denies you a seat at their prestigious table because you do not fit their superficial criteria. But the greatest lesson I learned within the walls of this hospital is that you do not stand in the corner and beg for scraps from people who despise your struggle. You walk away, you gather your own materials, and you build a better table. I looked back down at Chloe. She was shrinking into her seat, tears beginning to pool in her eyes. The golden child was finally confronting the reality of her own hollow existence. True success is not inherited, I stated, my voice rising with conviction. It is not granted by a platinum credit card or a curated social media profile. It is forged in the dark when nobody is watching. It is built by the people who are willing to scrub the floors, study until their vision blurs, and refuse to let the toxic opinions of gatekeepers determine their destiny. If someone tells you that you are not good enough, you do not argue with them. You outwork them, you outlast them, and you let your undeniable excellence serve as the final, unquestionable word. I delivered the remaining paragraphs of my speech flawlessly, detailing the incredible mentors like Dr. Sterling, who recognized potential when others only saw a burden. When I spoke the final concluding sentence, the silence in the room hung suspended for one breathtaking second. Then the auditorium erupted. It was not polite applause. It was a deafening, thunderous roar. The graduating medical students rose to their feet. The faculty stood up. Thousands of strangers delivered a standing ovation that shook the floorboards of the stage. I stepped back from the microphone, picking up the silver pen and my clipboard. I looked at the third row one last time. My parents were glued to their chairs, unable to stand, unable to clap, entirely paralyzed by the public dismantling of their elitist lies. The ceremony proceeded to the presentation of diplomas, but the dynamic in the room had permanently shifted. I returned to my seat feeling lighter than air. The ghost was dead. Dr. Harper Myers had taken her place. But the morning was far from over. As the final notes of the closing orchestral march played and the crowd began to filter out toward the grand lobby, the real test awaited. My family had just been publicly exposed, but their desperate need for proximity to prestige would never allow them to simply walk away in silence. They were trapped in the building with the daughter they threw away, and I knew they were currently pushing through the dense crowd, frantic to orchestrate a confrontation that would rewrite the narrative before I slipped out of their grasp forever. The grand lobby of the auditorium felt like a chaotic ocean of academic triumph. After descending the wooden steps of the main stage, I navigated the dense throngs of graduating students and their weeping relatives alongside Dr. Sterling. The air was thick with the scent of expensive floral bouquets and the echoing hum of 1,000 overlapping conversations. Flashbulbs erupted from every direction, capturing the culmination of a decade of grueling labor. We found a quiet alcove near the towering arched windows to escape the primary crush of the crowd. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the historic glass, catching the gold threads of my academic hood. Dr. Sterling placed a firm, reassuring hand on my shoulder. She did not offer hollow platitudes or dramatic praise. She merely looked at me with the quiet, profound respect of an equal colleague. We stood together in the warm light, enjoying the pristine silence of victory. The ghost I had been for the past 5 years was officially laid to rest. I was Dr. Harper Myers, a fully funded Ivy League neurosurgeon, standing at the precipice of an undeniable career. That dignified peace was abruptly punctured by a sound that made my spine turn to steel. It was a high-pitched, frantic call, echoing over the heads of the distinguished guests. "Harper, sweetheart, wait right there." I turned slowly. My mother was shoving her way through a group of elderly university alumni. The pristine ivory designer suit she had so carefully pressed that morning was now severely rumpled. Her wide-brimmed hat sat slightly off-center, giving her an unhinged, desperate appearance. She was no longer the haughty suburban matriarch holding court at a neighborhood country club. She resembled a drowning woman clawing her way toward a life raft. She broke through the final layer of the crowd and lunged toward me. Her arms were outstretched, her eyes wide, with a manic, artificial pride. She aimed to pull me into a tight embrace, intending to project a picturesque reunion for any lingering photographers. During my childhood, she often utilized sudden physical affection as a manipulative tool, a way to silence my complaints in front of company or assert her dominance. I recognized the tactic instantly. I did not flinch. I simply took one deliberate, clinical step backward. Her hands grasped empty air. She stumbled forward slightly, her polished heels scraping awkwardly against the smooth marble floor. The physical rejection hung in the space between us, cold and undeniable. Her fake smile faltered, but she quickly attempted to paste it back onto her face, smoothing the lapels of her jacket to regain her composure. "Harper," she breathed, her chest heaving from the exertion of running across the lobby. "We had no idea. We were sitting in the audience and heard your name over the speakers. Why did you keep this a secret from us? Our own daughter, a decorated neurosurgeon. We are so incredibly proud of you." The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the air like a foul odor. She was attempting to rewrite history in real time. She wanted to instantly transform from the elitist woman who banished me into the devoted mother of a medical prodigy. She believed her biological title granted her immediate, unearned access to my prestige. I looked down at her. I did not raise my voice or narrow my eyes. I spoke with the precise, measured tone I used when delivering complex diagnoses to patient families. I kept this a secret because 5 years ago, you made your boundaries explicitly clear. I stated the words slicing through the ambient noise of the lobby. You called me on the telephone and told me my state school education and my discount clothing were an embarrassment to the family. You ordered me to stay away from this exact campus to protect your curated social image. I was merely honoring your request. My mother flinched as if I had struck her. The blood drained from her face, leaving a chalky, pale mask. She opened her mouth to argue, but another figure materialized behind her. My father pushed through the remaining onlookers, panting slightly from the effort. He was the man who had looked at my undergraduate acceptance letter and coldly refused to contribute a single dollar to my tuition, demanding I build character through financial independence. Now he reached out, offering a tentative, cowardly smile, hoping to smooth over the tension and secure his share of the glory. "Now, Harper, let us not dredge up the past today," he muttered, glancing nervously at the surrounding families who were beginning to stare. Emotions were high back then. "We are a family. You cannot just cut us out of a milestone like this. We deserve to celebrate your accomplishments, too." I shifted my gaze to him, pinning him under the weight of his own profound hypocrisy. "You do not get to claim the harvest when you refused to water the soil." I replied, my voice unwavering. "You decided my education was a financial burden, not worth your investment, while you simultaneously bankrupted yourselves to fund a Manhattan illusion for your favorite child. You do not want to celebrate me. You want to attach yourselves to my title because your own status is crumbling. You want to brag to your neighbors that your daughter is a Yale doctor to mask the reality of your debt." My father swallowed hard, stepping back as if the truth physically burned him. The patriarchal authority he once wielded within our suburban home had entirely evaporated. He possessed no leverage here. He could not threaten to withhold funds because I had generated my own wealth. He could not threaten eviction because I owned my own space. My mother let out a strangled, pathetic sob. The aristocratic facade finally shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Real tears replaced the manufactured joy streaking her expensive foundation. "But we are your parents," she pleaded, her voice cracking as she reached out a trembling hand toward my velvet sleeve. "We made mistakes, but you have to forgive us. You cannot just turn your back on your own blood. We love you." Dr. Sterling shifted her weight, standing protectively at my side, a silent, imposing witness to their unraveling. Her presence alone served as a testament to what real, unwavering support looked like. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling a profound sense of emptiness. There was no lingering anger left to give her. The resentment had burned away years ago, replaced by the steady, quiet hum of my own ambition. "I did forgive you," I explained, keeping my hands calmly folded over my leather clipboard. Letting go of my anger was a requirement for my own survival. But forgiveness does not equal access. Forgiveness does not mean you are entitled to a front-row seat to the success you actively tried to destroy. I am not turning my back on my blood. I am simply enforcing the boundary you drew 5 years ago. I am closing a door you slammed shut. My mother buried her face in her hands, weeping openly in the center of the grand lobby. She was surrounded by the elite society she worshipped, yet she had never looked more pathetic or isolated. My father stood frozen, helpless to fix a situation he could not buy his way out of. I prepared to turn around and walk out into the bright afternoon sunlight. The surgical extraction was complete. But the reckoning was not entirely finished. The crowd parted one final time. A third figure pushed through the whispering onlookers. It was Chloe. She was still wearing the cheap event staff lanyard around her neck. Her hair was messy from carrying boxes of programs all morning. Her face was stained with ruined makeup and contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The golden child, stripped of her funding her Manhattan apartment and her protective parental shield, was finally forced to step out of the shadows. She stopped 2 feet away from me, her hands balled into tight fists, trembling with a lifetime of unearned entitlement, ready to confront the sister she had spent a lifetime replacing. Chloe stopped 2 feet away from me. The physical contrast between us was a striking testament to the divergent paths our lives had taken over the last 5 years. I was draped in the heavy, prestigious velvet of a Yale doctoral gown, standing tall and secure in my earned authority. My sister was wearing a wrinkled polyester polo shirt. A cheap plastic name badge hung from a frayed blue lanyard around her neck, identifying her as temporary event staff. The glittering Manhattan influencer who used to post photographs of expensive champagne from rooftop bars had been entirely erased. In her place stood a broken, exhausted woman whose fabricated reality had finally collapsed under the weight of its own emptiness. "You planned this," Chloe hissed, her voice trembling with a potent mixture of rage and profound humiliation. She pointed a shaking finger at my academic hood. "You orchestrated this entire morning just to set us up. You wanted us to sit in that audience and look stupid. You wanted to embarrass us in front of all these people." Her accusation was a fascinating display of the victim mentality my parents had carefully cultivated within her. Even in the face of my undeniable academic triumph, Chloe still believed the universe revolved exclusively around her narrative. She genuinely thought I had spent half a decade enduring the grueling crucible of medical school solely to orchestrate a seating chart prank. I looked at my older sister, feeling an unexpected absence of anger. During my teenage years, her cruel remarks and her effortless ability to steal our parents' affection used to wound me deeply. Now I merely observed her with the detached, clinical pity of a physician examining a terminal diagnosis. "I did not plan anything, Chloe," I replied, my voice calm and resonant, carrying easily over the hushed whispers of the surrounding crowd. "I do not possess the power to orchestrate your eviction from a luxury apartment you could never afford. I did not force you to reject entry-level jobs because you felt they were beneath your status. And I certainly did not submit your employment application to the university events management team. You navigated your way to that folding chair in the third row using your own compass. I just focused on building my career. I outworked you. I spent the last 5 years studying human anatomy and securing research grants, while you spent 5 years complaining on the internet." Chloe flinched. The blunt, factual delivery of her failures stripped away her remaining defenses. Her face twisted into a mask of bitter resentment. "You always thought you were superior," she cried, hot tears finally spilling over her eyelashes and cutting paths through her ruined foundation. "You always looked down on us because you were the smart one. You think wearing that robe makes you better than me?" I shifted my weight and lifted the leather clipboard I had been holding at my side. I unclipped the heavy silver pen resting near the top edge. I held the polished metal instrument up into the afternoon sunlight. "Do you recognize this?" I asked, keeping my gaze locked on her tear-stained face. Chloe blinked, staring at the silver object. Confusion briefly replaced her anger. She shook her head, signaling she did not understand the relevance. "I purchased this pen at a boutique downtown 5 years ago." I explained, my tone shifting into a quiet, intense register. "I worked 4 consecutive graveyard shifts, typing trauma reports to afford the engraving on the side. It was your college graduation gift. I mailed it to you the morning after Mom called and ordered me to stay away from your ceremony. I sent it because despite the cruelty of my exclusion, I still wanted to celebrate your achievement." I took a slow, deliberate step closer to her. "I found this exact pen 7 days ago." I continued holding the engraved initials toward her. "I found it sitting in a plastic disposal bin in the basement hallway of the events management building. You did not even value my sacrifice enough to keep it in a desk drawer. You carried it to your new job and casually threw it in the trash. You discarded my effort the exact same way this family discarded my presence." Chloe stared at the engraved letters CM stamped into the silver barrel. The realization hit her with staggering force. The undeniable physical proof of her own callous disregard rested right in my palm. She could not spin the narrative. She could not blame our parents. The silver pen was an indictment of her own personal entitlement. Her shoulders slumped forward. The manic defensive energy drained from her body, leaving behind a fragile, hollow shell. The golden child facade finally fractured beyond repair. "I was always jealous of you," she whispered, her voice cracking into a raw, pathetic sob. My mother, standing a few feet away, gasped in horror at the confession. But Chloe ignored her, keeping her tearful eyes fixed on my face. "They gave me everything," she cried, her words tumbling out in a desperate, unpolished rush. "They paid for my tutors, my trips, my apartment. They told me I was special and destined for greatness. But I never actually knew how to do anything. I just followed their script. I smiled for the photographs and spent their money. But you had real drive. You had actual talent. I watched you study until your hands shook, while I was handed straight A's I did not earn. I knew you were going to succeed. I hated you for it, because it proved how empty I was. I just did what they told me to do, and now I have nothing. I am setting up folding chairs while you are saving lives." The confession hung heavy in the grand lobby. It was the most honest statement my sister had ever articulated in her entire life. The tragedy of the golden child is that conditional praise destroys resilience. My parents had wrapped her in a protective financial bubble, shielding her from failure and consequence. In doing so, they amputated her ability to survive the real world. They had handicapped her with unearned privilege, while my rejection had served as the ultimate sharpening stone for my grit. Before I could respond, my mother stepped forward. She did not reach out to comfort her sobbing daughter. She did not offer a soothing embrace to the child who had just admitted to feeling entirely empty and broken. Instead, my mother grabbed Chloe's arm and yanked her backward, giving her a harsh, frantic shake. "Stop it!" Sandra hissed, her face contorted with embarrassment. Her eyes darted around the lobby, terrified of the distinguished alumni and university donors observing the meltdown. "Stop making a scene, right now. You are embarrassing us in front of these people. Dry your face and stand up straight." That single interaction summarized the entire toxic DNA of our bloodline. Even in a moment of profound emotional collapse, my mother prioritized the aesthetic. She cared more about the opinions of passing strangers than the psychological agony of her favorite daughter. The illusion of perfection was the only deity she worshipped. I watched them struggle with each other and felt the final heavy chain tethering me to my past snap clean in half. I did not want their apologies. I did not want their validation. I merely pitied the cold, shallow reality they were doomed to inhabit. I clipped the silver pen back onto my clipboard. I looked at the three of them standing together, a crumbling portrait of suburban debt and superficial vanity. "You made your choices," I told them, my voice devoid of any lingering emotion. "You chose prestige over character. You chose an image over a daughter. Now you have to live within the walls of the reality you constructed." I looked directly at my father, who was staring at the marble floor, unable to meet my eyes. "Do not attempt to contact the hospital administration," I warned him, issuing a clear professional boundary. "Do not call my department seeking a reconciliation. Do not send holiday cards. The security personnel at the neurosurgery pavilion have your photographs and your names on file. If you attempt to access my professional space, you will be escorted off the premises by the campus police. This is not a negotiation. This is the end of our association." I did not wait for them to process the finality of my statement. I did not care if they cried or argued or stood frozen in the lobby. The transaction was complete. I turned my back on my biological family, facing the grand arched doorways leading out to the bright New England afternoon. Dr. Sterling walked silently beside me, her presence a steady, comforting anchor. We moved toward the exit, leaving the ghosts behind us, ready to step into a future they would never be allowed to touch. Stepping through the heavy brass doors of the auditorium and out into the bright New England afternoon felt like crossing a physical border into a new country. The crisp spring air hit my face, carrying the scent of blooming dogwood trees and the distant sound of campus bells chiming the hour. I took a deep breath, letting the oxygen fill my lungs without the restrictive, suffocating pressure of my past weighing down my chest. Dr. Sterling walked beside me, her emerald green surgical hood catching the sunlight. We did not speak right away. The profound silence between us was not empty. It was filled with the resonant, undeniable victory of surviving a crucible and emerging victorious. We left the campus grounds and walked toward an upscale private dining club situated on the edge of the university district. Dr. Sterling had reserved a secluded room weeks in advance. When the hostess guided us through the elegant mahogany double doors, I found my closest medical school peers waiting inside. These were the individuals who had shared my grueling midnight study sessions, the friends who had brought me stale hospital cafeteria sandwiches when I was too focused on a microscope to remember to eat. They stood up and raised their glasses of sparkling water and vintage wine as I entered the room. Sitting at that long, polished table, surrounded by genuine warmth, I realized I was finally experiencing what a real family looked like. Nobody in that room cared about my discount clothing from 5 years ago. Nobody demanded I perform a specific role to elevate their social standing. They celebrated my intellect, my resilience, and my character. We spent the evening eating incredible food, laughing over shared clinical mistakes, and toasting to our upcoming residencies. I felt a deep, anchoring sense of belonging. The phantom ache of the empty chair at my biological family's table dissolved entirely, replaced by the solid oak of the table I had built for myself. While I was enjoying the finest meal of my life, the consequences of the morning were rapidly catching up with the people I left behind in the lobby. The American suburban ecosystem is a ruthless environment. It operates on a currency of gossip and perceived perfection. My parents had spent decades cultivating an image of flawless, upper-middle-class prosperity among their country club peers and neighborhood associations. But a public spectacle inside the lobby of an Ivy League institution is impossible to contain. Several prominent donors and alumni from their home county had attended the commencement ceremony. They witnessed the entire confrontation. They heard my speech. They saw my mother weeping in her ruined designer suit and watched my sister admit to her own fraudulent existence while wearing a temporary staff lanyard. By the time my parents drove their rented car back to their crumbling estate, the whispers had already infiltrated their social circles. The social ostracization was swift and merciless. The neighbors who used to attend my mother's lavish garden parties suddenly stopped returning her phone calls. The boutique where she worked folded under the pressure of the rumors. The store manager, a woman fiercely protective of her luxury brand aesthetic, quietly terminated my mother's employment the following week, citing a need to downsize the retail staff. Without that meager income, the precarious financial house of cards my parents had constructed finally collapsed into dust. The bank initiated formal foreclosure proceedings on their pristine suburban home before the end of the summer. The house that had served as the ultimate symbol of their superiority was auctioned off to cover the insurmountable mountain of credit card debt they had accrued funding my sister's Manhattan delusion. They were forced to pack their remaining possessions into a rented moving truck and relocate to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a much less prestigious zip code. The glittering elite reality they worshipped had chewed them up and spit them out, leaving them with nothing but the bitter taste of their own hubris. Chloe faced a similar harsh reckoning. Yale University maintains strict professional standards for all employees, including temporary event staff. Engaging in a loud, tearful altercation with the keynote speaker while wearing a university uniform was a direct violation of their conduct policy. The Human Resources Department terminated her contract the very next Monday. Stripped of her parental funding and her employment, she was thrust into the unforgiving reality of the modern job market. I learned through a mutual acquaintance months later that the former lifestyle influencer was working the early morning shift at a corporate coffee chain, wearing a green apron and serving the exact expensive lattes she used to photograph. I did not celebrate their downfall. I simply observed it as the natural, mathematical result of their choices. Gravity always collects its debts. My own trajectory moved in the exact opposite direction. I began my neurosurgery residency in July. The hours were brutal, often stretching into 80-hour weeks, filled with complex spinal traumas and delicate cranial procedures. But every time I scrubbed into an operating room, holding a scalpel under the harsh surgical lights, I felt a profound sense of purpose. I was saving lives. I was repairing shattered nervous systems and giving desperate families a second chance at time with their loved ones. The prestige of the title was merely a byproduct of the relentless, meaningful work. During my second year of residency, I decided to materialize the final lesson of my commencement speech. Using a portion of the stipend from my published research, I partnered with Dr. Sterling to establish a financial foundation within the medical school. We named it the Silver Pen Grant. The grant was designed specifically for pre-med students from low-income backgrounds who lacked the resources to afford standardized testing preparation and application fees. We provided the necessary capital to bridge the gap, ensuring that raw talent would never be locked out of the medical field simply because a student could not afford the entrance toll. The object that once symbolized my deepest rejection was transformed into a literal key, opening doors for dozens of future physicians. If you look at my journey through a psychological lens, there is a specific destructive concept known as transactional affection. It is the toxic belief that love must be earned through the acquisition of status, wealth, or aesthetic perfection. I spent the first 2 decades of my life suffocating under that system. My biological family viewed children as investments meant to yield a high social return. When my path required gritty, unglamorous struggle, they deemed me a bad investment and discarded me. What actually saved me was stepping off their trading floor entirely. Dr. Sterling did not demand a return on her investment. She offered unconditional mentorship. She recognized my intrinsic value when my pockets were empty and my shoes were falling apart. Here is the ultimate truth I want you to carry with you. If the people who share your blood make you feel like an embarrassment simply because your journey does not look like a shiny trophy, you have every right to walk away. You do not owe your sanity to people who only want to claim you when you are convenient. Blood simply dictates biology. It does not dictate loyalty, and it certainly does not dictate your destiny. You possess the power to build a magnificent life far beyond the limitations of their narrow expectations. Success is not about returning to your abusers to prove them wrong. It is about constructing a reality so vibrant, so deeply fulfilling, and so undeniably excellent that their toxic opinions simply cease to exist in your universe. I am Dr. Harper Myers. I am a neurosurgeon. I am a survivor. And I finally found my true family. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. If this narrative resonated with you, if you have ever had to walk away from conditional love to build your own table, please hit that like button and subscribe to Olivia Tells Stories. Your support ensures these messages reach the people who need to hear them the most. Share your own experiences with setting boundaries in the comments below, because your survival might be the exact blueprint someone else needs to read today. Always remember, you are the author of your own worth. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next story.